Anhel, pleasure to meet you.
Nice to
Love
meet
your
you, Greg.
film. Love your film. It says on your IMDb page that you are a cinephile. Now,
I
what is the key
like
as
to
it?
think I am.
Yes, you are. I could tell. What is the key as far as not just being a cinephile, but as a filmmaker, blending your film with a level of naturalism, with cinematic dynamism, with a sense of cinema? Because I think that is such a hard thing to do as a director, and you accomplished it with this film. What were the keys for you?
Wow, man. First of all, thank you so much for that. Um, well, I'm self-taught in cinema, so my main reference definitely were uh, the movies that I grew up with, and the movies that as I grew up with, it started resonating with me. Um, it was late in my teenage years, or maybe like mid teenage years, where I started to have an overload of international cinema in my life. Um, my dad, he doesn't know English, and he was never really a big fan of fantasy films. So his films would be like Almodovar and everything that comes out of Spain. And at first you're like resilient, like why I don't want to see that. But then as I grew up and I started seeing, I remember when I first saw Abre los Ojos from Amenábar and Tesis, and all the earlier films of Almodóvar, and even going back to Cuban cinema like Memoria del Subdesarrollo, or even in Mexican cinema from the 60s and earlier Puerto Rican cinema as well. Like I started like just getting this sense of the humanity of things, like the lack of tools or the lack of VFX and all this stuff really just gave you nothing else but the heart and talk about the human emotion, and being able to marry those elements with visual spectacles that I have fell in love, that I grew up with, especially like the independent cinema of the 90s, that American New Wave, or even the neorealism, Italian neorealism. Those really started informing how I saw life. So being able to, thinking of Pasolini, or going as far as the Dardenne brothers and all these different type of cinema, but being able to play with the dynamic energy of the cinema of the 90s. I felt like I started just thinking of stories in that way. And of course, they need to fit within the constraints of the story and what the story demands. But my I appreciate being able to do so much with so little, because it allowed me to keep myself grounded in the heart of the story, and from there be able to materialize it in the visual language.
Angel, you mentioned neo-realism. It's the pioneers were those, like you said, the Italian filmmakers, but they actually lived in Italy and they shot those stories because it was in their blood.
Hmm.
This movie seems like it was shot from someone who lived, breathed, and ate Baltimore and bike culture. What is the key to actually not come from here, but actually immerse yourself within a small window and still make it real? What advice would you give for you? You
Well, I
know,
mean, one of the things that, in a personal note, I don't see myself doing it any other way. Like I found it very difficult to not do that. Um, I guess part of it comes from that constant pursuit of intimacy, of authenticity, and immersion that I got in part out of anger by seeing the way they would represent Puerto Ricans without ever being like spending a day there or knowing the people or listening to them, their wants and needs. So in order to avoid that and respect the city that I am honored to represent in the movie, I went in the same way that I would have gone to shoot in Puerto Rico. So I spent a lot of weeks there with them. I embedded with them. I hung out with all the guys from the 12 O'Clock Boys. I started to understand the charm of Charm City. I started to find what really makes the people special, and be able to grab from my experiences in Puerto Rico and just really tell the human story over there, as opposed to uh, have this gaze or this foreign gaze of a city. The kids are not paying attention to everything that goes in the city. Like, I don't pay attention to everything that goes in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is Puerto Rico, and I will show you the people around Puerto Rico. I won't show you um, the disaster zones or the misery porn or anything like that. Like, they live there. That's where they are. Like, I don't have. I just want to focus on them, and it's really hard to. It's really easy to. In my case, it's very easy to not get distracted by the unknown when you focus on the heart of the story.